When I mention British lads on holiday, this is what you might think of. Flooding various parts of southern Europe en masse to indulge in drinking and partying. But what if I told you young English males going on holiday to southern Europe is actually part of the oldest vacationing traditions in the world, and that in fact they are the original tourists. Yes, they invented the word tourist. Today we shall discover the origins of vacationing as we know it today. We will take a look at the original stag weekend, spring break or summer holidays. This time in history, the Grand Tour. As far as we know, the history of vacationing or traveling for leisure starts in the Roman Empire. The Romans had namely achieved some important factors which led to the start of this activity. Firstly, the Romans had achieved longer periods of relative peace in their vast empire, which is quite convenient for travel to say the least. Secondly, they built a vast network of reliable and safe roads, which at its peak stretched over 100,000 kilometers long, all the way from Portugal to Turkey. Their vacation, obviously only reserved for the ultra-rich and powerful of the empire, looked a bit different from ours. They often lasted multiple years to explore as much of the Roman Empire as possible, and obviously also had multiple objectives besides pure leisure. After the fall of the Roman Empire, these travels also disappeared for the most part. The lack of a vast and unified, mostly important, peaceful empire made traveling difficult in medieval Europe. Europe was a quilt of small regions, each with their own customs and rules, constantly at war with one another, and the roads were incredibly dangerous to travel on. This slowly started changing towards the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century, when Europe, very slowly, began taking the shape we know it as today. Now, we're supposed to be talking about holidays and vacationing, so let me invite you on a trip, starting in London in the late 17th century. After years of civil war and other unrests, King Charles II had recently been crowned King of England, Ireland and Scotland, restoring his father's power. Like the rest of Europe, England as well consisted of a vastly intricate and complicated powerhouse of nobility, with the king at its peak. Many lords, earls, dukes, barons, viscounts, marquesses and other noble people ruled the classist society. All had their own interests, power and politics, and their heritage or lineage was one of their most important objectives. Let's say you are the firstborn son in one of these English noble families. Of course, at the time, the son was the heir to the titles and estates of these noble families, so they were actually considered the most important child. These were the people who, at that age, benefited from the best education and formation around, and slowly, spending some time abroad became an important part of that education. Think of it as an early version of what we would now consider Erasmus studies. Soon, an industry sprouted around granting these young aristocrats of England and later other Northern European countries a tour through Europe, mostly Italy, which was quickly deemed the Grand Tour, after a novel written by a priest in 1670 who described his travels through Italy. The aim of the Grand Tour was to offer its then called Grand Tourists, if the word rings a bell, a coach trip across Europe along a set itinerary to indulge oneself in the culture, cuisine and of course festivities of other nations. Let's take a further look at these early versions of spring breaks. Your voyage starts with a little trip from London, where you probably reside as a young aristocrat, to the White Cliffs of Dover, where a boat awaits you to drop you off across the channel in either the Belgian town of Ostende or Le Havre or Caen in France. You are most probably accompanied by some friends of your own rank, maybe some staff, and not unimportantly someone called a bear leader. This bear leader was usually an elderly gentleman of nobility as well, who had been on the Grand Tour himself before and acted as a tutor for the Grand Tourist. He was a sort of guardian, not only to the young men themselves, but also to their family name. Their goal was to keep troubles, such as unwanted pregnancies, far away. The first thing you take care of when you arrive on the continent is some formalities. First, you hire a French-speaking guide to assist you in your travels. In all of continental Europe, people spoke French at that time. At least the nobility that you were planning on meeting did. Afterwards, you need some means of transport, so either buy or rent a coach and horses to travel with. Right, so you just landed in Belgium or France and are in a coach with your mates. Off you go. The first stop along the way is Paris, and while you let the French countryside pass by your windows, let me remind you of why exactly you are on this trip. Your parents, among the English elite, want to form you into a well-educated, well-off and worldly person. You need to be schooled in classical arts, music, literature, Greek, Latin, and besides that are also tasked with bringing back some of these fine arts and other developments from all over Europe. That's not the only reason why you're off to Europe, or why you're accompanied by a bear leader. This is your chance to get all your wild behavior out of your system. Far away in Paris, Italy, or even Greece. You can do whatever you want. No worries if you get someone impregnated or want to lay with men, which by the 16th and 17th century standards was absolutely not done in England. The bear leader will make sure things do not get too much out of hand before you return to England after a couple of months or even years, wiser, richer in culture, where you will settle down and marry a nice girl from your own circles and avoid any scandal at all cost. As you enter Paris, the first thing you absolutely need is a tailor. Next off, you'll participate in activities such as dance classes, fencing, horse riding, and you'll learn the courtly manners of the high society. This was specifically done because you were being readied for your future role in diplomacy. When you were done in Paris, you and your company would move towards Switzerland, over the Alps. Obviously, you're on holidays, so the trip over the Alps has to be comfortable. So just like current days where Nepalese Sherpas offer their services to help rich tourists climb Mount Everest, in the 17th century you went to the region around the French town of Val d'Isère, where carriers offered their services to dismantle your coach and carry your belongings over the mountains. For the ultra-rich and lazy, they could even carry persons over the mountains. In Switzerland, the idea was to have a spiritual retreat, a religious break of some sorts, in a haven of reformists before you entered the Catholic country of Italy. Obviously, you and your mates just shortly visit the great cities of Genève and Lausanne to tell your parents you did your duty and have been there, before you quickly move on to the real reason of your trip, Italy. Italy is not only known for its great arts, literature and music, but also for its lavish parties, orgies and something which is known as the Italian vice, sex between the same gender. With all these plans in mind, you cross into Italy, first stopping over in Milan and Turin, before moving further south. As someone who has been looking forward to a good holiday, you have made sure to plan your travels around some important Italian parties, such as the Roman Week in Rome and of course the greatest and most well-known party of your time, Carnival in Venice. In every city you meet the nobility, and you are sure to collect art, a self-portrait, preferably with some of the ruins of the great Roman and Greek societies in the background, and if you're wealthy enough and have a good bear leader in your group, you even get to visit the Pope. After your trip in Italy, the itinerary changes for every person according to their interest. Some just spent all their time in Italy and directly went back to England, others visited Greece, Turkey, some went up north to Germany to return via the Netherlands and Flanders back to England. In the most visited cities by grand tourists across Europe, such as Paris, Rome, Venice and Naples, local entrepreneurs started thinking up businesses to take advantage of all these visiting grand tourists. In Italian cities, small mosaic pictures of landmarks were offered to grand tourists to send back home as a remembrance. And as a young, worldly aristocrat, you started referring to these items which remember you of your travels as souvenirs, French for visiting again or coming to mind. In cities such as Paris, a new industry came to be to literally cater to the tourists which flooded the city from all over Europe. A place to indulge one in the finest culinary taste of the country without any specific event. The French started calling these places restaurants. And so an end has come to your trip. You return to England with a vast collection of skills, experiences, education, and also items such as art, fashion, and other things, souvenirs, ready to start your adult life. Thank you for joining me on today's travels, and I hope to see you next time in history.